in the oblivious field of mortal mind, revealed to the closed prophet eyes of trance, or in some deep internal solitude, witnessed by a strange, immaterial sense, the signals of eternity appear. The truth mind could not know unveils its face. We hear what mortal ears have never heard. We feel what earthly sense has never felt. We love what common hearts repel and dread. Our minds hush to a bright omniscient. A voice calls from the chambers of the soul. We meet the ecstasy of the Godhead's touch in golden privacies of immortal fire. Well, there's so much here, isn't it? When we go deeply within, and all of us, I believe, have experienced this many, many times. When we go deeply within, almost we can say in a trance with our closed eyes, or if it's just an internal solitude, it doesn't have to be in a trance, it doesn't have to be with closed eyes, it can just be in some deep internal solitude. But that is witnessed by a strange immaterial sense. It's not a material sense that witnesses it, but that witness is able to catch the signals of eternity because they appear before it. And the truth that mind could not know unveils its face. And then he has three lines that begin with the word we. We hear, we feel, we love. These things are very important. They are never done by accident by Sri Aurobindo. So he wants us to feel this we. We hear what mortal ears have never heard. We feel what earthly sense has never felt. We love what common hearts repel and dread. Now look how he organizes it. First, we hear it. Then we feel it. And lastly, we love. And what do we love? We love even the evil and the darkness in people. And even their enmity towards us. And this is a big, big progress if we can make this and not be moved by the thoughts, even the thoughts or the words of others. So when common hearts repel and dread these things and react to them, we don't. We love what they repel and dread. Now, when our minds hush to this bright omniscient, and here again, Sri Aurobindo capitalizes the O of omniscient. In the dictionary, we see that omniscient means having total knowledge, knowing everything. But Sri Aurobindo says, the omniscient is not born, nor dies, nor has he come into being from anywhere, nor is he anyone. He is unborn. He is constant and eternal. He is the Ancient of Days, who is not slain in the slaying of the body. And this is from the Upanishads, direct from the Upanishads. In the secret of the Veda, he also gives us something. This is the omniscient, who knows the law of our being and is sufficient to his works. Let us build the song of his truth by our thought, and make it as if a chariot on which he shall mount. When he dwells with us, then a happy wisdom becomes ours. With him for friend, we cannot come to harm. Sri Krishna has also said this to us. And now we have a voice calls from the chambers of the soul. Yes, that voice is our psychic being. And through it, there's a semicolon at the end of the line. We meet the ecstasy of the Godhead's touch in golden privacies of immortal fire. Privacy is the British pronunciation with which Sri Aurobindo would have been most familiar. And it means the quality or the condition of being secluded from the presence or the view of others. It could also be private places. We can say that. So in golden privacies of immortal fire, we meet the ecstasy of the Godhead's touch because a voice calls from the chambers of the soul. We have to go back always to the beginning of Sri Aurobindo's phrases, which begins here, the truth mind could not know, unveils its face. And then we see how he takes us along on this journey, that we can hear what mortal ears have never heard. We can feel what earthly sense has never felt. We love what common hearts repel and dread, and our minds then hush to a bright omniscient. Semicolon there, and a semicolon in the next line. So it's not finished yet. He tells us then that a voice calls from the chamber of the soul. It is our inner voice, it is our psychic being, and we meet the ecstasy of the Godhead's touch in golden privacies of immortal fire. All of you who have had any experience of Mother's touch, whether she was in the body or not in the body, you have experienced this ecstasy of the Godhead's touch. There is nothing like it in the human world. This immortal fire begins as a spark, we can say, on a little hearth, and it grows and grows into a flame. That flame eats up all the darkness in us and around us. So let us begin with the next phrase that Sri Aurobindo gives us. It's so beautiful. These signs are native to a larger self that lives within us, by ourselves unseen. Semicolon. Only sometimes a holier influence comes. A tide of mightier surgings bears our lives, and a diviner presence moves the soul. There's a lot on presence, and I'm going to read it to you. But we want to finish this passage. Or through the earthly coverings, something breaks. A grace and beauty of spiritual light. The murmuring tongue of a celestial fire. Let's go back to the beginning. These signs are native to a larger self. They are not unknown to our larger self. They are native to it. They belong to it. And that larger self lives within us, but most of the time, it's not seen by ourselves. That lives within us by ourselves, unseen. But then, after the semicolon, he says to us, only sometimes a holier influence comes. A tide of mightier surgings bears our lives, and a diviner presence moves the soul. This surging, these mightier surgings, they rise up in us. They swell forward like waves. We can feel them even as waves. And these bear our lives. They hold it up. And it's a tide of it. So, a tide is the movement of the sea when we say low tide and high tide when it comes in. So now it's a tide of mightier surgings that bears our lives. And along with it, a diviner presence moves the soul. Oh, how often have we felt this? That we have made contact with a diviner presence, moving our soul. Perhaps when we saw Mother, perhaps when we read something as in Savitri, perhaps when we stood before the Samadhi or in the Matrimandya chamber. These things happen without the mind knowing. The mind is not aware of these movements, this diviner presence that moves the soul. It moves the soul. And we're going to get into presence in a moment, but I just want to end it because he then says, or through the earthly coverings. The earthly coverings are the veils that we have all around us. Something breaks through them. And what is it? It's a grace and beauty of spiritual light, the murmuring tongue of a celestial fire. Murmuring is sort of a low, continuous sound, like a brook going along, or the wind, or the tree in the trees, or of low, indistinct voices. So beautiful. And therefore, this low, continuous sound, this tongue of a celestial fire, well, that's the grace and beauty of spiritual light breaking through the earthly coverings. Now, let's go to the presence. You notice that Sri Aurobindo, of course, capitalizes the word presence. In the letters on yoga, he writes, it is intended by the word presence to indicate the sense and perception of the divine as a being, felt as present in one's existence and consciousness, or in relation with it, without the necessity of any further qualification or description. Very clear, absolutely clear. This presence is the sense of the divine as a being within us. And it needs no further qualification or description. He continues, thus, of the ineffable presence, it can only be said that it is there, and nothing more can or need be said about it. Although, at the same time, one knows that all is there: personality and impersonality, power and light and ananda, and everything else, and that all these flow from that indescribable presence. Then he goes on to tell us the word may be used sometimes in a less absolute sense, but that is always the fundamental significance, the essential perception of the essential presence supporting everything else. And then in this wonderful little book, The Essays Divine and Human, he says, beyond mind, on spiritual and supramental levels, dwells the presence, the truth, the power, the bliss that can alone deliver us from these illusions, display the light, capital L, of which our ideals are tarnished disguises, and impose the harmony that shall at once transfigure and reconcile all the parts of our nature. Oh, I'd like to read that again. Beyond mind, on spiritual and supramental levels, dwells the presence, the truth, the power, the bliss that can alone deliver us from these illusions, display the light of which our ideals are tarnished disguises, and impose the harmony that shall at once transfigure and reconcile all the parts of our nature. Now, in the Life Divine, he says, but if we learn to live within, we infallibly awaken to this presence within us, which is our more real self, a presence profound, calm, joyous. But if we learn to live within, we infallibly awaken to this presence within us. Infallibly, huh? Which is our more real self, a presence profound, calm, joyous, and puissant, of which the world is not the master. A presence which, if it is not the Lord himself, is the radiation of the Lord within. We can learn so much from one line in Savitri that is then explained by Sri Aurobindo in other areas of his writings. In the Life Divine, again, he has two quotations that I must read to you. The true soul, secret in us, subliminal, we have said, but the word is misleading, for this presence is not situated below the threshold of waking mind, but rather burns in the temple of the inmost heart, behind the thick screen of an ignorant mind, life, and body, not subliminal, but behind the veil. This veiled psychic entity is the flame of the Godhead, always alight within us, inextinguishable, even by that dense unconsciousness of any spiritual self within, which obscures our outward nature. So it is not subliminal, and it is not extinguishable. It is a flame born out of the divine and luminous inhabitant of the ignorance, grows in it till it is able to turn it towards the knowledge. Oh, so beautiful. It is a flame born out of the divine and luminous inhabitant of the ignorance. Grows in it, grows in the ignorance, till it is able to turn it towards the knowledge. It is the concealed witness and control, the hidden guide, the daemon of Socrates, the inner light or inner voice of the mystic. It is that which endures and is imperishable in us from birth to birth, untouched by death, decay, or corruption, an indestructible spark of the divine. Look at the words he uses. It is inextinguishable, imperishable, indestructible. And it is not moved by any of these movements of lower nature. If we need any personal and inner witness to this indivisible all consciousness behind the ignorance, all nature is its external proof. Personally, I have lived in this nature and have felt this external proof. Just look at a flower, inhale a fragrance, and we make contact with this indivisible all consciousness that is behind our ignorance. So, all nature is its external proof. We can get it with any completeness only in our deeper inner being, or larger and higher spiritual state. When we draw back behind the veil of our own surface ignorance and come into contact with the divine idea and will behind it. In the future, we will get into the Sri Aurobindo's definitions of idea, which he calls very often real idea, and will also. We'll get into that. Then we see clearly enough that what we have done by ourselves in our ignorance was yet overseen and guided in its result by the invisible omniscience. Incredible. What we have done by ourselves in ignorance was yet overseen and guided in its result by the invisible omniscience. We discover a greater working behind our ignorant working and begin to glimpse its purpose in us. Then only can we see and know what now we worship in faith, recognize wholly the pure and universal presence, meet the Lord of all being and all nature. You can see here, as I'm reading this Life Divine, passages from the Life Divine, that it is not so difficult if we go slowly, if we focus internally, deeply within, on his words. Because Sri Aurobindo's words too, not only in Savitri, have the presence of the overmind and at times are even, shall I say, mantric. Again from the Life Divine. The presence of the Spirit is there in every living being, on every level, in all things. And because it is there, the experience of Satchidananda, of the pure spiritual existence and consciousness, of the delight of a divine presence, closeness, contact, can be acquired through the mind, or through the heart, or the life sense, or even through the physical consciousness. And then here's the key. If the inner doors are flung sufficiently open, the light from the sanctuary can suffuse the nearest and the farthest chambers of our being. In the synthesis of yoga, and I'll just do a couple more, we may have to do the rest next week, but in the synthesis he says, there is a secret divine will, eternal and infinite, omniscient and omnipotent, that expresses itself in the universality and in each particular of all these apparently temporal and finite, inconscient or half-conscient things. This is the power or presence meant by the Gita when it speaks of the Lord within the heart of all existences, who turns all creatures as if mounted on a machine by the illusion of nature. And one more from the synthesis. For what yoga searches after is not truth of thought alone, or truth of mind alone, but the dynamic truth of a living and revealing spiritual experience. There must awake in us a constant indwelling and enveloping nearness, a vivid perception, a close feeling and communion, a concrete sense and contact of a true and infinite presence, always and everywhere. That presence must remain with us as the living, pervading reality in which we and all things exist and move and act. And we must feel it always and everywhere, concrete, visible, inhabiting all things. It must be patent to us as their true self, tangible as their imperishable essence, met by us closely as their inmost spirit, to see, to feel, to sense, to contact in every way, and not merely to conceive this self and spirit here in all existences, and to feel with the same vividness all existences in this self and spirit, is the fundamental experience which must englobe all other knowledge. And I'm going to close with this from the Letters on Yoga, just one sentence, and so important to all of us. One must have faith in the master of our life and works, even if for a long time he conceals himself, and then in his own right time he will reveal his presence. Margaret, would you read all the lines for us from the beginning today?
Yes.
In the oblivious field.
In the oblivious field of mortal mind, revealed to the closed prophetic eyes of trance, or in some deep internal solitude, witnessed By a strange immaterial sense, the signals of eternity appear. The truth mind could not know unveils its face. We hear what mortal ears have never heard. We feel what earthly sense has never felt. We love what common hearts repel and dread. Our minds hush to a bright omniscient. A voice calls from the chambers of the soul. We meet the ecstasy of the Godhead's touch in golden privacies of immortal fire. These signs are native to a larger self that lives within us by ourselves unseen. Only sometimes a holier influence comes. A tide of mightier surgings bears our lives, and a diviner presence moves the soul. Or through the earthly coverings sometimes breaks a grace and beauty of spiritual light, the murmuring tongue of a celestial fire.
And thank you
Canto.
for joining us today. It was a special session with
Thank you.
secret knowledge. Namaste.
Namaste.
Namaste, Narad.
Namaste,
Namaste,
Thank you.
Narad.